Ronald Jefferson was at the grocery store when he saw 5 men bothering a woman in a red dress outside. Most people walked past without helping. Ronald had lost his wife 3 years ago and knew what it felt like when nobody cared. He left his groceries and went outside to help her. Before we continue, tell us where in the world you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far our stories reach and how they resonate across the globe. Ronald walked up to the 5 men who were surrounding the woman. They were all wearing blue hoodies and blocking her against the wall. The leader's name was Jackson, and he was filming the woman on his phone while she tried to get away. Ronald told them to move, but they laughed at him and said he should leave. Jackson tried to push Ronald, but Ronald had been training in martial arts for many years. He grabbed Jackson's arm and slammed him into the wall. 2 other men rushed at Ronald, so he tripped one and punched the other in the stomach. The whole fight lasted about 5 seconds. The other 2 men started backing away when they saw how fast Ronald had beaten their friends. One man in the back had his hand in his pocket, like he had a knife, but Ronald told him he was smart enough to know this was over. The man took his hand out and raised both hands to show he was done fighting. Ronald picked up Jackson and made him apologize to the woman on camera. Jackson said he was sorry, and Ronald deleted the video and broke Jackson's phone. Then all 5 men left. The woman said her name was Sandra and thanked Ronald for helping her. She seemed very nervous and was holding her bag tightly. Ronald asked if she was okay and if she wanted him to call the police, but she said no very quickly. Ronald thought this was strange, so he told her he would walk her home to make sure she was safe. They walked together for several blocks. Sandra said she was a paralegal, but Ronald noticed her expensive dress and shoes and didn't think that was true. He also noticed she was holding her leather bag like it had something very important inside. When they got close to her apartment building, Sandra stopped and told Ronald that those men weren't just random harassers. They had been looking for her specifically. Sandra brought Ronald up to her apartment on the 8th floor. She locked the door with 2 locks and a chain, then finally put down her bag. She closed all the curtains and told Ronald the truth about who she really was. Sandra explained that she worked for a big tech company called Hexagon Industries, and she wasn't a paralegal. She was a senior financial analyst. She had discovered that the company's CFO was stealing $12 million through fake companies. She had all the proof on an encrypted hard drive in her bag, and she was supposed to meet with the SEC the next morning to turn him in. But someone had found out about her plan, and the CFO had sent those 5 men to steal her bag and the hard drive. They were supposed to make it look like a regular mugging. Sandra said she couldn't go to police because the CFO's brother was a high-ranking police officer who would protect him. Ronald asked what she needed from him, and Sandra said she just wanted him to know that he might be in danger now too because he had stopped those men. Ronald looked out the window and saw a black SUV parked outside her building with the engine running. He asked how long it had been there, and Sandra said it wasn't there when they arrived. Ronald told Sandra to leave the hard drive behind because it was now bait to trap her. She said she needed it as evidence, but Ronald explained that if she had copies stored online, this drive was worthless. He took the drive and smashed it with a hammer from her kitchen to destroy it completely. He said this would make the people after her think she had panicked and destroyed all the evidence, which would buy her time. They left her apartment and tried to take the stairs, but they heard men coming up from below. Ronald pulled Sandra through a door onto the 5th floor, but 2 security guards in uniforms were there. The guards told Sandra she had to come with them, but Ronald refused to let them take her. One guard reached for his gun, so Ronald hit his wrist and then his jaw, and both guards fell down. Ronald and Sandra ran through the building's service entrance and into an alley behind the building. They heard the guards shouting and car doors slamming, so they kept running toward the subway station 2 blocks away. They jumped a fence and ran down the subway stairs just as the train was arriving. They got on the train right before the doors closed. Sandra called her mother and said she was coming to stay with her that night. Then she asked Ronald where he was going, and he said he was going home to his son Marcus, who was 11 years old. Sandra asked about Marcus's mother, and Ronald told her that his wife had died in a car accident 3 years ago. A drunk driver named Daniel Rourke had run a red light and killed her instantly. The driver only served 3 months in jail, because his father was a lawyer, and now he was living in Connecticut with a wife and 2 kids. The train stopped at Ronald Station, and he got up to leave. Sandra asked how she could find him to thank him properly, but Ronald said she didn't need to thank him. He told her to just go to her mother's house, meet with the SEC the next day, and put those criminals in prison. Then he got off the train. Listen, if you're still here, it means you're invested. You want to see what happens next. But here's the reality. Most people watch stories like this and scroll away without subscribing. They enjoy it, then vanish. If this story actually matters to you, if you genuinely care about how it ends, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Otherwise, you'll probably forget this channel exists and miss all the other incredible stories I share. Ronald walked home from the subway station, thinking about everything that had happened. He had spent 3 years trying to be invisible and avoid trouble, and in one night, he had gotten into 2 fights and helped a corporate whistleblower escape from security guards. He wondered if he had made the right choice. When he got close to his apartment building, he saw a police car parked outside. 2 officers were standing by his door. Ronald's first thought was that Marcus was hurt, and his heart started racing. He ran up to the officers and asked what was wrong. The officers said Marcus was fine and was inside the apartment. They said they wanted to ask Ronald some questions about an incident that had been reported earlier that evening. Ronald asked what incident, and they said 5 men had filed complaint about being assaulted outside a grocery store. Ronald felt his stomach drop. He realized the 5 men had gone to the police to file charges against him. One of the officers asked Ronald to come to the station to give a statement, and Ronald said he would come but wanted to check on his son first. The officer said that was fine, and Ronald went inside his apartment. Marcus was sitting on the couch watching TV, and he looked worried. Ronald told him everything was okay, and that he just needed to go talk to the police about something. Marcus asked if Ronald was in trouble, and Ronald said no, it was just a misunderstanding. Ronald went back outside and got in the police car. They drove to the station, and Ronald was put in an interview room. A detective came in and introduced himself. His name was Detective Walsh, and he said he needed to ask Ronald about what happened that evening. Ronald's blood went cold when he heard the name Walsh. Sandra had said the CFO's brother was Deputy Commissioner Walsh. Ronald asked if the detective was related to Deputy Commissioner Walsh, and the detective said yes. Walsh was his father. The detective showed Ronald his phone with a video on it. It was security camera footage from the grocery store, showing Ronald fighting the 5 men. The detective said the men claimed Ronald had attacked them without provocation. Ronald explained that they were harassing a woman, and he intervened to help her. The detective asked for the woman's name, and Ronald said it was Sandra, but he didn't know her last name. The detective smiled in a way that made Ronald uncomfortable. He said the 5 men didn't mention anything about a woman. Ronald said there was definitely a woman there, and she could confirm his story. The detective said they would try to find her, but without her statement, it was 5 witnesses against 1. Then the detective leaned back in his chair and said something that made Ronald's heart stop. He said one of the 5 men was named Jackson Rourke, and he was pressing charges for assault. Ronald asked if Jackson was related to Daniel Rourke, and the detective said yes. Jackson was Daniel's younger brother. Everything suddenly made sense to Ronald. This wasn't a random encounter. The 5 men harassing Sandra had been a setup to lure Ronald out of hiding. Someone had known Ronald wouldn't be able to walk past a woman being attacked. They had used Sandra as bait to get Ronald to reveal himself and his fighting skills. Ronald asked why they would do this, and Detective Walsh said that Daniel Rourke had been having a hard time since the accident 3 years ago. Even though he had only served 3 months in jail, he felt guilty about killing Ronald's wife. He had become depressed and started drinking again. His brother Jackson wanted revenge against Ronald for ruining Daniel's life. Ronald said he hadn't ruined anyone's life. Daniel had killed his wife and barely got punished for it. Detective Walsh shrugged and said that was true, but Jackson didn't see it that way. Jackson blamed Ronald for filing the lawsuit that had cost Daniel his job and his first marriage. Jackson had spent months planning this setup to get Ronald arrested for assault. The detective said Ronald was free to go for now, but he should expect to be charged. He also said that if Sandra came forward as a witness, things might go better for Ronald. But the detective smiled again when he said this, and Ronald understood the threat. They were going to make sure Sandra didn't testify. Ronald left the police station and called Sandra's mother's house from a payphone. A woman answered and said Sandra wasn't there. Ronald asked when Sandra was expected to arrive, and the woman said Sandra had never called her that night. Ronald felt sick. Sandra had lied about calling her mother on the train, or someone had intercepted her before she got there. Ronald went home and found Marcus asleep on the couch. He carried his son to bed and tucked him in. Then Ronald sat in his kitchen and thought about everything that had happened. Sandra was missing, probably taken by the same people who had sent the security guards. Jackson Rourke had set up an elaborate trap to get revenge for his brother, and Ronald had walked right into it because he couldn't ignore someone in trouble. Ronald didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table and tried to figure out what to do. Sandra was missing and probably in danger. The police were controlled by the same people who were after her, and Ronald was going to be charged with assault, which would take him away from Marcus. In the morning, Marcus came out of his bedroom and asked what was wrong. Ronald told him a simplified version of what had happened, that he had helped a woman who was in trouble, and now some people were mad at him for it. Marcus asked if Ronald was going to jail, and Ronald said he didn't know yet. Marcus started crying and said he didn't want to lose Ronald too. He had already lost his mother, and he couldn't lose his father as well. Ronald hugged his son and promised him that he would figure this out and they would be okay. After Marcus left for school, Ronald made a decision. He had spent 3 years being invisible and avoiding conflict, but that hadn't protected his family. His wife had still died, and now his son was in danger of losing his father. Being invisible hadn't worked. Ronald called a lawyer and explained the situation. The lawyer said the assault charges would be hard to fight without a witness, but they could find Sandra, and she testified. The case would probably be dropped. Ronald said Sandra was missing, and the lawyer said that was a bigger problem. Ronald spent the rest of the day trying to find Sandra. He went back to her apartment building, but the doorman said she hadn't been home. He called Hexagon Industries and asked for Sandra Silva, but they said no one by that name worked there. He even went to the police station and filed a missing persons report, but the officer who took his report was Detective Walsh's partner, and Ronald could tell nothing would come of it. By evening, Ronald was out of options. He picked up Marcus from school, and they went home. Marcus asked if Ronald had found the woman, and Ronald said not yet, but he was still looking. Marcus asked what would happen if Ronald got arrested, and Ronald said he had arranged for Marcus to stay with Ronald's sister if that happened. They made dinner together. Spaghetti, Marcus's favorite. While they were eating, Marcus asked Ronald why he had helped a woman if he knew it might get him in trouble. Ronald thought about this for a long time before answering. He told Marcus that 3 years ago, when his mother died, dozens of people had driven past the accident without stopping. The drunk driver had run away, and nobody had chased him. His mother had died alone on the street, while people drove around her car to avoid the traffic jam. Ronald said he had promised himself that he would never be one of those people who looked away when someone needed help. Marcus asked if it was worth it, even if Ronald went to jail. Ronald said he didn't know yet, but he hoped so. He said that doing the right thing didn't always work out well, but that didn't make it less important to do. Later that night, after Marcus went to bed, Ronald finally remembered the grocery bags he had left at the store. He had never bought the light bulbs Marcus had asked for 3 days ago. Ronald laughed at the absurdity of it. He had fought off 5 attackers, destroyed evidence in a corporate fraud case, and was probably going to be arrested, but he still hadn't bought light bulbs. He went to the hardware store on the corner and bought the light bulbs. When he got home, he installed them in the hallway bathroom where the old ones had burned out. The new bulbs were much brighter than the old ones, and they lit up parts of the bathroom Ronald hadn't seen clearly in months. Ronald stood in the bathroom, looking at himself in the mirror. He looked tired and older than 43, but he also looked like someone who had done something instead of nothing. He thought about Sandra, wherever she was, and hoped she was okay. He thought about the SEC meeting she was supposed to have, and whether she had made it or if the evidence was now gone forever. Then Ronald thought about Jackson Rourke and his elaborate revenge plan. He thought about how Jackson had used Sandra as bait, knowing Ronald wouldn't be able to ignore a woman in danger. It had been a smart plan, and it had worked perfectly, except for one thing. Jackson had assumed Ronald would be easy to prosecute once he was arrested. But Jackson didn't know that Ronald had helped Sandra destroy the hard drive and tell her to save the evidence online. If Sandra was still alive and free, she could still take down Hexagon Industries and everyone involved. And if that happened, Deputy Commissioner Walsh would have bigger problems than protecting his detective son. Ronald went to his computer and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He searched for Daniel Rourke's address in Connecticut. It took him 20 minutes to find it, but eventually he located Daniel's current residence in a suburb outside Hartford. Ronald wrote down the address. He wasn't sure what he was going to do with this information yet. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But for the first time in 3 years, Ronald felt like he had some control over his life instead of just reacting to what other people did to him. The next morning, Marcus asked Ronald what was going to happen next. Ronald said he didn't know, but whatever happened, they would face it together. He drove Marcus to school and then went to meet with his lawyer again. The lawyer had news. Sandra Silva had shown up at the SEC office that morning and given her testimony. The SEC had immediately launched an investigation into Hexagon Industries, and the CFO had been arrested. Ronald felt relief wash over him. Sandra was alive and had completed her mission, but his relief was short-lived. The lawyer explained that Deputy Commissioner Walsh was now claiming Sandra had stolen confidential company information and that Ronald had been her accomplice. The assault charges were being upgraded to conspiracy charges. Ronald realized that helping Sandra had made everything worse, not better. He was now facing years in prison instead of months. And Marcus would have to live with Ronald's sister, maybe for a very long time. That night, Ronald sat Marcus down and explained that he might have to go away for a while. Marcus cried and begged Ronald not to leave him. Ronald held his son and told him that sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you expected to pay, but you paid it anyway because that's what made you a good person. Ronald thought about the light bulbs he had finally installed. He thought about how they lit up things that had been hidden in shadow for months. He realized that his 3 years of being invisible hadn't protected him or Marcus at all. It had just made him easier to trap when the time came. From now on, Ronald decided, he would live in the light instead of the shadows. Whatever happened next, he would face it directly instead of trying to hide from it. He had lost his wife to a drunk driver and a broken justice system, but he wouldn't lose his self-respect by becoming someone who looked away when people needed help. The phone rang late that night. Ronald answered it and heard Sandra's voice on the other end. She was crying and saying she was sorry. She had just found out about the upgraded charges against Ronald. She said she never meant for him to get hurt like this. She offered to tell the SEC and the police that Ronald had nothing to do with her whistleblowing and had just been trying to help someone in danger. Ronald told her not to do that. If she changed her testimony now, it would make both of them look guilty. He said she should stick to her original story and let the truth play out. Sandra said that wasn't fair to Ronald, and Ronald said fairness stopped matching the day his wife died. Now, all he cared about was doing what was right. After he hung up, Ronald went to check on Marcus one more time before bed. His son was asleep, hugging the stuffed bear his mother had given him before she died. Ronald stood in the doorway and watched Marcus breathe, thinking about all the things he wanted to teach his son before he potentially had to leave. The most important lesson, Ronald thought, was that being a good person was hard. It cost you things you didn't want to pay. It put you in danger you didn't ask for. It made your life complicated when it could have been simple. But being a good person was also the only thing that mattered in the end. When Ronald looked at himself in the mirror with the new bright light bulbs showing every line and imperfection on his face, he could still recognize the man looking back at him. That was worth more than safety or invisibility or an easy life. Ronald turned off the new hallway light and went to his own bedroom. Tomorrow he would probably be arrested. Next week he might be arraigned. Next month he could be on trial. But tonight he was home with his son, and he had done the right thing. And that would have to be enough. Ronald Jefferson's story teaches us that true courage isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing to do what's right even when it costs you everything. For 3 years, Ronald tried to protect himself and his son by becoming invisible, by looking away from trouble. But he learned that silence and inaction don't keep us safe. They only make us easier targets. When we see injustice happening in front of us, Whether it's someone being harassed on the street or corporate corruption destroying lives, we face a choice. We could be like the dozens of pedestrians who walked past Sandra, or we could be like Ronald who stepped forward despite the personal cost. The lesson isn't that heroism always leads to happy endings. Ronald faced criminal charges and potential separation from his son, but rather that our character is defined not by the consequences we face, but by the choices we make when no one else is willing to act. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that the system is broken, that fairness doesn't always prevail, and that standing up for others might put you in danger. But it also means being able to look at yourself in the mirror under bright lights and recognize the person staring back at you. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. Kindly support what I do here by subscribing. And then drop in the comment section if you like part 2 of Ronald and Sandra's story. Will Ronald face prison time for helping Sandra? Did Sandra's testimony bring down Hexagon Industries and Deputy Commissioner Walsh? What happens when Jackson Rourke discovers his revenge plan backfired? And most importantly, how will Ronald protect Marcus if the Rourke family comes after them again? Let me know if you want to hear more.